You want to know how a $10 billion man can die in a $5 million hospital room, surrounded by 20 of the most brilliant medical minds on the planet? It's not the disease you think it is. What kills you, sometimes, is the arrogance of the people paid to save you. And what saves you? Sometimes, it's the person you've trained your entire life to ignore. The person who scrubs your floors. What would you do if you held a man's life in your hands, but the entire world, every single person with power, saw you as less than nothing? As just part of the furniture? Let me know what you think in the comments below. And while you're at it, hit that subscribe button and ring the bell, because the story I'm about to tell you is a masterclass in how the invisible can see what the brilliant are blind to. The air in the Pinnacle Wing of Crestwood University Medical Center wasn't just filtered. It was curated. It smelled of money. A sterile, antiseptic bass note overlaid with the faint, expensive cologne that clung to the custom-milled woodwork. Here, in this temple of exclusive healthcare, wealth didn't just buy privacy. It bought the illusion of immortality, an illusion that was rapidly failing Sterling Vance. In his penthouse suite, Vance was a ghost haunting his own life. The tech mogul, a man who had bent the digital world to his will, was now a prisoner in his own deteriorating body. A symphony of quiet, urgent beeps from machines disguised as mahogany nightstands played the soundtrack to his decline. The greatest specialists in America, men and women with resumes that read like a directory of Ivy League royalty, frowned at readouts, conferred in hushed, important tones, and remained utterly, terrifyingly stumped. Into this theater of gilded desperation stepped Elena Ramirez. At 2:17 a.m., she was a shadow in a gray uniform, a ghost of a different sort. The night shift was a haven, a place where the powerful were asleep and the hallways were empty. Fewer eyes to look through her, to dismiss her, to erase her. At 42, her movements were a study in weary efficiency, honed by 2 decades of being overlooked. A single mother, a night shift janitor, an invisible woman. She pushed her cart into the suite, the soft whir of its wheels the only sound she made. She breathed in the familiar cocktail of lemon-scented disinfectant, that expensive cologne, and something else. Something underneath it all, a faint, metallic tang. It was wrong. It was the scent of a problem, a chemical signature that didn't belong. Her mind, a place where dusty, forgotten textbooks on advanced toxicology still lived, jolted with a spark of recognition. She stopped, her hand frozen on the handle of her mop. Her gaze, trained by years of observation, of seeing the details no one else bothered to notice, swept over Sterling Vance. It wasn't a casual glance. It was an analysis. She saw the almost imperceptible yellowing of his fingernails, a specific, sickly hue. She saw the peculiar, patchy pattern of his hair loss, not the clumps of chemotherapy, but a diffuse, creeping retreat. She saw the subtle, bruised discoloration along his gum line, a faint purple-gray line that a doctor, looking for 100 other things, would easily miss. Her heart, usually a slow, steady drumbeat of fatigue, began to race. A cold, clear certainty washed over her, sharp and crystalline as laboratory glass. The disparate, puzzling symptoms that had baffled 20 of the world's best doctors suddenly snapped together in her mind, forming a single, horrifying picture. She knew. She knew exactly what poison was, slowly, meticulously, and deliberately killing Sterling Vance. But who in God's name would ever listen to a housekeeper? Who would believe the woman who mopped the floors had seen the answer that 20 specialists had failed to find? The secret wasn't just in the poison. It was in the rigid, unbreachable wall between her world and theirs. The Pinnacle Wing was designed to feel like a Four Seasons hotel, not a hospital. The medical equipment, The IV drips, the monitors, all were cleverly concealed behind rich mahogany panels and soft, ambient lighting. Sterling Vance had paid a fortune for this exclusivity, demanding that the nation's top diagnosticians be flown in to solve the mystery of his body's rebellion. He had bought the best minds money could find. Elena moved through the suite with the methodical grace of long practice. She dusted the expensive surfaces, her cloth moving over framed photos of Vance with presidents and celebrities, over artifacts of a life so far removed from her own it might as well have been on another planet. She was a single mother of 2 teenagers, Leo and Sophia. Her life was a constant, grinding calculation of bus schedules, grocery bills, and the ever-present fear of a sick day she couldn't afford. But in her mind, she was still that girl in the lab coat, 20 years younger, the star of the Crestwood University Chemistry Department, the scholarship student on a fast track to a PhD and a life in medical research. Then came the car accident that had stolen her parents and left her with 3 younger siblings to raise. She had withdrawn from the university mid-semester. A temporary measure, she'd told herself. A promise to return. A promise life had never let her keep. 10 feet away, Dr. Alistair Finch addressed his assembled team. Silver-haired, impeccably dressed, with a voice that commanded attention without ever needing to be raised, he was the platonic ideal of a world-class physician. "Gentlemen, ladies," he said, his tone heavy with frustration. "We have exhausted every conventional diagnostic pathway. Mr. Vance's symptoms continue to defy categorization. His liver function is in freefall. The neurological degradation is accelerating. We must begin to consider more exotic etiologies." Elena kept her head down, her focus seemingly on a stubborn smudge on a glass tabletop, but her ears were wide open. It was a skill she'd perfected in college, absorbing complex organic chemistry lectures while taking meticulous notes, a skill now repurposed for gleaning information in a world that rendered her mute. They saw her uniform, the symbol of her station, and assumed the mind behind it was as empty as their expectations. They never saw the library books on toxicology she read on her lunch breaks, the online medical journals she consumed on the bus ride home. She had the knowledge, just not the credentials framed on a wall, and in their world, the frame was everything. "The cleaning staff needs to be finished in here promptly, Doctor," Finch announced, his gaze flicking over Elena for a fraction of a second before dismissing her. He wasn't speaking to her, but about her, as if she were a malfunctioning appliance. "We have critical matters to discuss." Elena nodded, her face a neutral mask, hiding the familiar bitter sting of being rendered invisible. She backed away, melting into the background. "He walks past me every single day like I'm a goddamn potted plant," she thought, a flash of anger cutting through her weariness. "And that's why he'll never, ever see what I see." As she wiped down the surfaces in the adjoining bathroom, her eyes caught Vance's patient chart, left open on a counter. Puzzling symptoms: peripheral neuropathy, alopecia, severe gastrointestinal distress. They were classic presentations, but they had been misattributed, viewed as separate, unrelated fires instead of smoke from a single hidden inferno. Her gaze shifted from the chart to Vance's personal effects, arranged with military precision on the marble countertop. A collection of eye-wateringly expensive grooming products. A particular brand of hand cream in an elegant black jar stood out. Imported. Exclusive. She noted its position. She had cleaned this bathroom yesterday, and it had been in a slightly different spot. Someone had moved it. It was a tiny, insignificant detail. But in chemistry, in toxicology, the smallest inconsistencies often held the biggest answers. She filed the observation away. The suite door swished open, and a man in a perfectly tailored suit entered. Jefferson Croft, according to the visitor's badge clipped to his lapel. Elena recognized him from the covers of business magazines. He was Vance's fiercest rival, the one man who had consistently challenged his dominance in the tech sphere. Now, during Vance's illness, Croft had repositioned himself as a loyal, supportive friend. A wolf in sheep's clothing, Elena's gut screamed. "Alistair," Croft said, his voice smooth as silk. "How is he?" "No improvement, Julian," Dr. Finch replied, his professional mask firmly in place. "He's resting." "I brought him a fresh jar of his favorite hand cream," Croft said, placing an identical black jar on the nightstand next to Vance's bed. "Imported from a little apothecary in Switzerland. It's a small comfort, I know, but he insists it's the only brand that doesn't aggravate his skin." Elena watched, unseen from the bathroom doorway, as Croft positioned the jar. He didn't just set it down. He placed it with an almost ceremonial care, angling it so it was prominent, inviting. The gesture was too deliberate, too insistent. It was a performance. Something cold and analytical in her mind clicked into place. Later that night, as she cleaned an empty patient room down the hall, she overheard two residents talking in hushed tones. "It's the strangest damn symptom progression I've ever seen," the first one said. "It's like 3 different diseases attacking him at once." "Finch is leaning toward some kind of unique autoimmune cascade," the second replied. "But none of the tests support it. They all keep coming back inconsistent. Meanwhile, the richest man in Chicago gets weaker by the hour, and we're just chasing ghosts." Elena paused, her hand gripping a spray bottle of cleaner. The fragments were all there, floating in her mind. The bizarre multi-system symptoms, the inexplicable decline, the expensive imported hand cream that was replenished with such devoted regularity. A hypothesis, wild and terrifying, began to form. But a hypothesis wasn't proof. She needed to observe more. That night, she subtly adjusted her cleaning schedule, making sure to be in or near Vance's suite during his sleeping hours, when observation was easiest. She studied the updates on his chart, memorizing the new data points, the worsening lab results. Each new symptom, each note on his declining neurological function was another piece of the puzzle, confirming her horrifying suspicion. The pattern was becoming undeniable, a textbook case study for someone with her specific, forgotten knowledge. As her shift ended at dawn, Elena stared at her own reflection in the cracked mirror of the employee locker room. She saw the gray, functional uniform. The tired face, etched with lines of worry and exhaustion, but with eyes that were still sharp, still fiercely intelligent. She saw the invisible barrier that separated her world of mops and disinfectant from their world of stethoscopes and diplomas. "They don't see me," she whispered to her reflection, "but I see everything." The frantic, piercing shriek of alarms erupted at 2:17 a.m. A disembodied voice echoed from the overhead speakers. "Code Blue, Pinnacle Suite 1. Code Blue, Pinnacle Suite 1. Elena was cleaning the adjacent suite when she heard it. Her heart hammered against her ribs. Doctors and nurses sprinted past her in the hallway, their faces tight with adrenaline. Vance had crashed. She abandoned her cart, her professional duty forgotten, replaced by a desperate scientific curiosity. Through the partially open door of the suite, she watched the controlled chaos unfold. "Liver enzymes are critical. Kidney function is dropping off a cliff," a young resident shouted, his voice strained with tension. "Neurological responses are minimal." Dr. Finch strode into the room, his calm demeanor a force field against the rising panic. "Get me a full toxicology panel, stat. Run it again. Something is causing this cascade failure, and I want to know what it is." Elena edged closer, drawn by a mixture of human concern and the cold, compelling pull of the puzzle. The medical team worked with frantic precision. Monitors beeped a frantic, accelerating rhythm. Nurses rushed in with crash carts and syringes. "Could it be environmental?" suggested a younger physician, a Dr. Chen. "Something in his food, his water, personal products?" Dr. Finch shot him a look that could curdle milk. "We've tested every single thing in this room twice, Doctor. The water is filtered. The food is prepared in a dedicated kitchen. Focus on medical possibilities, not amateur detective work." Dr. Chen visibly shrank back, silenced. The team continued their urgent, desperate dance, managing to stabilize Vance, pulling him back from the precipice, but only temporarily. As the immediate crisis subsided and the doctors began to disperse for consultations, Elena saw her chance. She slipped into the room under the guise of her duties. She first went to his chart, her eyes scanning the new data, memorizing the critical values that confirmed the rapid systemic assault on his body. Then, her gaze returned to the bathroom counter. To the hand cream. Something about its metallic sheen, the way the light caught it, triggered a specific memory from a dusty lecture hall 20 years ago. A lecture on heavy metal poisoning, on the perfect poisoner's tool. She moved closer to the bed, her eyes fixed on Vance's hands. The discoloration on his fingernails, subtle but distinct. The specific quality of his hair loss. The abdominal pain the nurses had been reporting for weeks. She took a sharp, quiet breath. The symptoms didn't just match. They were a perfect, one-to-one correlation with thallium poisoning, exactly as described in her old toxicology textbook. How? How could 20 of the world's most acclaimed specialists miss something so classically presented? Her mind raced. She had to tell someone. She hesitated, then approached Sarah, a night nurse with whom she'd built a quiet, friendly rapport over years of shared late-night shifts. "Excuse me, Sarah," Elena said, her voice barely a whisper. "I know this is going to sound crazy, but has anyone checked Mr. Vance for thallium poisoning? His symptoms, they match it exactly." Sarah's friendly expression evaporated, replaced by a patronizing, dismissive smile. "Elena, I know you mean well, you really do. But please leave the medicine to the doctors. These are the best specialists in the country." "But the pattern, the hair loss, the neuropathy—" "If you're done eavesdropping on medical emergencies," Sarah interrupted, her voice suddenly cold as ice, "the bathroom floor needs to be mopped." Elena stepped back as if slapped, her cheeks burning with a familiar, suffocating heat. She returned to her cart, the weight of 1,000 similar dismissals settling onto her shoulders. But this time was different. Beneath the humiliation, a hard, cold certainty was crystallizing in her mind. She knew what was killing Sterling Vance. The only question now was whether she was willing to risk her entire life to make someone listen. As she wheeled her cart down the silent, gleaming corridor, Elena's mind was a whirlwind. The symptoms aligned with her hypothesis with a chilling perfection. The progressive neurological issues, the severe digestive problems, the distinctive, diffuse pattern of hair loss. In her undergraduate toxicology course, thallium had been presented as the poisoner's poison, colorless, odorless, easily absorbed through skin contact, causing catastrophic systemic damage, while perfectly mimicking a dozen other less sinister conditions. It was a ghost, a phantom that was notoriously difficult to detect unless you were specifically looking for it. She completed the rest of her shift on autopilot, her body going through the motions of cleaning while her mind was consumed with Sterling Vance's declining condition. When she got home to her small, cramped apartment, before even taking off her shoes, she pulled a heavy, worn textbook from a small bookshelf, her treasured salvaged collection from her university days. She flipped to the chapter on heavy metal poisoning. The words on the page confirmed everything. Thallium. It was all there in black and white. The next morning, fueled by cheap coffee and a terrifying resolve, Elena arrived at the hospital early. She was determined to find a way, any way, to make someone listen. She watched from a distance as Julian Croft made his daily visit, bringing yet another fresh jar of the exclusive hand cream. The routine was always the same. He would insist it was the only brand Vance would tolerate, and he would even personally apply some to the dying man's hands, a perfect performance of a concerned friend. It was also the perfect delivery system for a slow, deliberate poisoning. Elena weighed her options. A direct confrontation would be a disaster. She was a janitor. They would think she was insane. She needed evidence. Hard, irrefutable proof that even the arrogant Dr. Finch couldn't ignore. She had to cross a line. That afternoon, she saw her chance. While cleaning Dr. Finch's private office, a space she was intimately familiar with, she scribbled a note on a piece of official hospital stationery, disguising her handwriting. It was simple, anonymous. Check for thallium poisoning. Classic presentation. Neuropathy, alopecia, GI distress. She left it on top of the clipboard on his desk, a place she knew he would look first. The next morning, her stomach churning with anxiety, she positioned her cleaning cart near the doctor's conference room. Through the partially open door, she heard Dr. Finch's voice, laced with audible derision. "And apparently," he said, and she heard a rustle of paper, "our cleaning staff now has diagnostic opinions they'd like to share." A wave of cruel, dismissive laughter rippled through the room. "Someone left an anonymous note," Finch continued, "suggesting thallium poisoning." "We tested for heavy metals in the initial workup, Alistair," another doctor responded. "It was clean." "Exactly. Standard procedure," Finch dismissed with a final contemptuous snort. "The cleaning staff playing detective. What's next? Are they going to be scrubbing in for surgery?" The laughter echoed in the hallway. Elena's chest tightened until she could barely breathe. Her hands gripped the handle of her cleaning cart, her knuckles turning white. The sting of their mockery was sharp and painful, but the image of Sterling Vance, dying in that bed, mattered more than her pride. She had to find another way. She formulated a new approach. Dr. Chen, the younger physician Finch had shut down, had at least considered an external source. He seemed more open-minded, less encased in arrogance. Later that afternoon, she timed her cleaning of the hallway to intercept him as he left a patient's room. "Excuse me, Dr. Chen," she began, her voice steady despite her heart racing like a trapped bird. "I apologize for interrupting. I'm Elena Ramirez from Environmental Services, about Mr. Vance. I have a strong reason to believe he's suffering from thallium poisoning. The symptoms match the classic presentation perfectly." Dr. Chen's expression shifted from surprise to acute discomfort. "That's an interesting theory, Ms. Ramirez, but as I'm sure you heard, we've already tested for heavy metals." "Standard tests might miss it," Elena pressed, her voice low and urgent, "especially if it's being administered consistently in small doses over a long period. The body metabolizes it, but the damage accumulates. It's in his hand cream, the one his friend brings." I appreciate your concern," he interrupted, glancing at his expensive watch. "Really, but I have to be somewhere. Perhaps you could mention it to the nursing staff." He turned and walked away quickly, a man desperate to escape an uncomfortable situation. Elena stood alone in the hallway, invisible once more. The final blow came later that evening. The hospital's head of security, a large, intimidating man named Harris, approached her as she cleaned the main rotunda. "Ms. Ramirez," he said, his voice low and menacing. "We've had some reports that you've been interfering with medical matters, discussing patient care with the physicians." Elena's blood ran cold. "This is your one and only warning," he said, stepping closer. "You are here to clean. That is all. Know your boundaries or there will be consequences. Do you understand me?" Elena could only nod, her throat tight with a mixture of fear and fury. She needed evidence. Hard, irrefutable proof that no one, not Dr. Finch, not the nurses, not security, could dismiss. But getting it meant crossing lines that could not only cost her the job her family depended on, but could potentially land her in jail. That night, alone in the deserted employee break room, surrounded by the smell of stale coffee and disinfectant, Elena made her decision. Sterling Vance had days, maybe hours, left. Her job security, her fear, none of it could outweigh a human life. She formulated a plan, a risky, desperate plan that drew on the chemistry knowledge that had lain dormant inside her for 20 years. She would need cleaning supplies, access to a lab space, even a makeshift one, and perfect, flawless timing. Tomorrow she would force them all to see what they'd missed, or she would lose everything trying. Elena, this is your last chance to turn back. Risk it all for a man who wouldn't even know your name, or play it safe and let him die? It's a hell of a choice. Before we find out what she does, if you're on the edge of your seat, do us a favor and smash that like button. It tells the algorithm that stories of courage and hidden genius matter. Now, back to the hospital, where Elena is about to make the biggest gamble of her life. Julian Croft visited again the next afternoon. His visits were always brief, never more than 15 minutes, but he always completed his primary task, ensuring the jar of hand cream was prominently placed. Elena observed from the hallway, disguised by the bustle of her work. She watched as he encouraged the day nurse to apply a generous amount to Vance's hands and arms for comfort. A perfect public display of care that doubled as the administration of another dose. After Croft left, Elena knew she had her window. Performing her routine cleaning in Vance's bathroom, she carefully studied the creams container. The expensive, minimalist packaging revealed nothing. But the product itself, when she examined it closely under the harsh fluorescent light, had a faint, almost imperceptible metallic sheen. She needed a sample, but taking it openly was impossible. She waited for the nursing shift change, that brief, chaotic period when Vance's suite would be momentarily unattended. With practiced, efficient movements that belied her racing heart, she used a sterile cotton swab from her cart to transfer a small, pea-sized amount of the cream into a sterile specimen container she'd borrowed from a supply closet. The container, no bigger than her thumb, disappeared into the deep pocket of her uniform. The first piece of evidence was secured. That evening, when Elena picked up her children from her neighbor's apartment, her distraction was palpable. Leo, 12, and Sophia, 14, were used to their mother's bone-deep exhaustion. But this was different. This was a taut, humming anxiety. "Mom, you okay?" Sophia asked, her perceptive gaze taking in her mother's clenched jaw. "Just a complicated situation at work, honey," Elena replied, forcing a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Nothing for you to worry about." After the children were asleep, Elena spread her materials across the worn linoleum of her kitchen table. Her old toxicology textbook lay open. Printouts from online medical journals were scattered about. Her own handwritten notes on Vance's symptoms formed a horrifying timeline. The pattern was undeniable to her trained eyes. So why couldn't 20 of the world's most brilliant specialists see it? The answer was as simple as it was infuriating. Because they weren't looking for it. Because thallium poisoning was a relic, an archaic poison from old spy novels. Because they had run their standard automated panels that were designed to catch common toxins, not a gradual, insidious exposure. Because their minds were trapped in the box of their own expertise, unable to conceive that a billionaire was being slowly murdered by a trusted friend with a jar of hand cream. And because no one, absolutely no one, ever listened to the housekeeper. Elena stared at her gray cleaning uniform hanging on the back of the kitchen door. It was the physical embodiment of her invisibility, a cloak that made her disappear in plain sight. Tomorrow, she thought, a cold resolve settling deep in her bones. Tomorrow I risk everything to rip this cloak off. Tomorrow I force them to see both the poison and the person who found it. She arrived for her shift the next day, carrying a small, discreet bag alongside her usual supplies. Inside were innocent items that could be found in any home or janitorial closet: baking soda, aluminum foil, small plastic containers. But in the hands of a chemist, combined with standard cleaning solutions, they could create a rudimentary but effective chemical test for the presence of thallium. Her first task was to gather more evidence. During the morning rounds, she timed her cleaning to overhear the doctors discussing Vance's latest symptoms. The progression was a perfect match, a textbook case: worsening neuropathy that was now affecting his speech, the distinctive hair loss pattern, a rapid, terrifying deterioration despite all their supportive care. In a deserted maintenance closet at the far end of the hall, Elena worked with the quick, precise movements of a bomb disposal expert. Her makeshift chemistry setup, a few glass beakers borrowed from a disused lab, her scavenged chemicals, looked nothing like the sophisticated, million-dollar equipment in the hospital's main lab. Yet the principles of chemistry remained the same, whether in a closet or a state-of-the-art facility. She had performed similar precipitation reactions hundreds of times in university labs, earning top marks for her accuracy and efficiency. She carefully introduced a solution containing the hand cream sample to her reactive agent. She held her breath. A cloudy, yellowish precipitate began to form. The test confirmed her suspicion. Positive for thallium. She took a clear photo of the results with her cheap smartphone. Next, she used a hospital computer in the library to access the visitor logs, which were, fortunately, part of the public-facing system. She printed out the records for the past 3 months. The pattern was undeniable. Julian Croft, the business rival turned supportive friend, visited regularly, almost daily, and the timing of his visits correlated perfectly with the escalation of Vance's symptoms. At 2:00 p.m., she heard the frantic whispers. An emergency conference was being called in Sterling Vance's suite. All specialists were required to attend. His condition had become critical. It was her moment. It was now or never. She went to the locker room, changed into a freshly laundered uniform, straightened her ID badge, and gathered her evidence: the photo of the test results, the printed visitor logs, her handwritten timeline correlating the visits with the symptoms, and the printouts from the toxicology journals. She walked toward the pinnacle wing, her heart a frantic drum against her ribs. She rehearsed her explanation in her mind, drawing on the cold, hard language of science, on the toxicology knowledge memorized 2 decades ago. She reached the suite. Inside, the doctors were gathered, their postures radiating tension and defeat. Dr. Finch stood at the center, presenting the latest failed interventions. Elena knocked once, a sharp, decisive rap, and entered without waiting for an invitation. 20 pairs of the most expensive eyes in medicine turned toward her. Dorisum, Finch's expression morphed from surprise to pure, unadulterated irritation. "This is a closed medical conference," he snapped. "We will call you when we are finished." "Mr. Sterling Vance is dying of thallium poisoning," Elena stated, her voice clear and steady, betraying none of the terror she felt. "And I can prove it." A stunned silence fell over the room. Dr. Finch's face hardened into a mask of contempt. "Security," he began to say, reaching for his phone. "The symptoms match the classic presentation perfectly," Elena continued, stepping forward and placing her meticulously organized evidence on the conference table. "Progressive, ascending peripheral neuropathy, distinctive alopecia, severe abdominal pain, and cognitive decline. It's textbook." She tapped the photo on her phone. "I confirmed the presence of thallium in his hand cream, the imported Chamberlain brand he uses every day. It's being absorbed through his skin, a slow poisoning over the course of months. "This is absurd," Dr. Finch sputtered, his face flushing a deep red. "You're a housekeeper, not a physician." "I was a chemistry honors student at this university before family circumstances forced me to withdraw," Elena responded, her gaze locked on his, refusing to back down. "The poison is being introduced through the hand cream brought by Julian Croft during his regular visits. The timeline of his visits matches the progression of the symptoms perfectly." She laid out her evidence with the methodical precision of a scientist. She pointed to the visitor logs, then to her symptom progression chart. Her explanation was precise, technical, and irrefutable, drawing on a deep well of toxicology knowledge that had remained sharp despite years of disuse. "Your standard heavy metal panels would miss it," she explained, her voice gaining confidence. "The poisoning is gradual, designed to maintain levels just below the typical detection thresholds for an acute exposure. But the cumulative effects, the slow buildup in his tissues, they are unmistakable." A profound silence fell over the room. The 20 specialists stared at the evidence, then at the housekeeper who had presented it. Dr. Finch opened his mouth to object again, then closed it, his eyes scanning her documents with a horrified, dawning realization. It was Dr. Chen, the young physician who had been so quickly dismissed before, who leaned forward first. "My God," he whispered. This actually makes perfect sense. The symptom progression, the inconsistencies in the tests. Gradual exposure would explain everything." Another specialist, an older woman, nodded slowly. "The hair loss pattern and the specific nature of the neuropathy, it is highly consistent with thallium toxicity. We were looking for a single, catastrophic event, not a slow, steady tide." The silence in the room deepened as 20 of the world's most brilliant minds were forced to confront the colossal truth of what they had missed. And, more shockingly, who had found it? "It's thallium poisoning," Elena concluded quietly, her voice resonating in the hushed room. "The symptoms are textbook. You just have to know what book to look in." Elena stood her ground, an island of calm in the swirling currents of shock and dawning horror. The maintenance closet chemistry had been a long shot, crude by their billion-dollar laboratory standards, but it was based on sound, immutable principles. "How exactly did you test for this?" asked Dr. Winters, the team's chief toxicologist, his voice a mixture of skepticism and grudging respect. "A modified sodium rhodizonate reaction," Elena replied, without a flicker of hesitation. "I adapted it for field testing with limited resources. The color change to a yellowish-brown precipitate is unmistakable when thallium ions are present." Dr. Winter's eyebrows shot up. "That's an advanced qualitative analysis technique. It's rarely used outside of specialized forensic labs." "It was covered in advanced toxicology methods, a second-year chemistry special topics course," Elena responded, her voice even. "Professor Harrison's class." A flicker of recognition crossed the faces of several of the older doctors. Harrison was a legend in the Crestwood chemistry department. "You were a student of Harrison's?" Dr. Chen asked, his voice filled with a new kind of awe. "For one semester," Elena answered, the old familiar ache of that long-lost dream briefly visible in her eyes. "Before I had to withdraw." Dr. Finch was now examining her improvised test results with a look of grudging, horrified fascination. His ego, his pride, his entire professional identity couldn't deny the scientific evidence laid out before him, however unorthodox its source. "The concentration pattern suggested by the symptom timeline points to deliberate, sustained exposure," Elena continued, pressing her advantage, pointing to her meticulously crafted chart. "Each application of the cream delivers a sublethal dose that slowly accumulates in his tissues. The symptoms escalate in perfect, undeniable correlation with Julian Croft's visits. The dynamic in the room had irrevocably shifted. The specialists began asking her technical questions about metabolic pathways, absorption rates, and testing protocols. Elena answered each one with precise, scientific terminology. With every correct, confident response, her invisibility chipped away. They were finally seeing her. Not her gray uniform, but her mind. Dr. Chen pulled up Sterling Vance's latest lab results on a tablet. If you run a targeted mass spectrometry specifically for thallium, rather than a general heavy metal panel, you will find elevated levels, Elena finished, her voice now filled with quiet authority. Particularly if you test hair samples from the past 3 months, they will show you the entire poisoning timeline. The energy in the room had transformed. The dismissive, hierarchical barrier had shattered. In that moment, knowledge had proven more powerful than credentials. Run a focused thallium test. Now, Dr. Finch ordered, his voice strained, breaking the stunned silence. 2 specialists nearly tripped over themselves, rushing to comply, grabbing a sample of the hand cream from the nightstand and preparing new blood draws. Dr. Finch remained frozen for a moment, staring at Elena's methodical evidence, his face a kaleidoscope of disbelief, realization, and a profound, reluctant acknowledgement. "If you're correct," he said finally, the words tasting like ash in his mouth, We've been poisoning him further with some of our treatments. The chelation therapy you were using for suspected mercury poisoning would be ineffective against thallium," Elena confirmed calmly. "He needs Prussian blue, immediately. It's the only effective binding agent." The specialists exchanged glances, their minds frantically recalibrating decades of medical training. A nurse burst back into the room a few minutes later, breathless. "Rush toxicology confirms," she announced, her voice trembling slightly. "Thallium, at significant and rising levels." The room erupted in a storm of controlled chaos. Orders were flying. Treatment protocols were being rewritten on the fly. Security was being contacted regarding Julian Croft. "Check the security footage," Elena suggested, her voice cutting through the noise. From inside the room, Croft likely applied some of the cream to his own hands at some point to establish trust in the product, to show it was harmless. Dr. Finch nodded, his eyes meeting hers with a look of pure, unadulterated respect. "Already requested." He paused. "But how did you—" "The pattern was clear once I looked for it," Elena explained simply. "Mr. Croft always brought the same gift. Mr. Vance's condition always worsened afterward. You were all looking at the disease. I was looking at the room." The hospital's head of security entered, his face grim. "We've reviewed the footage from the in-room camera. Croft manipulated the cream when he was alone in the room on several occasions. We've contacted the authorities. They are on their way." The Prussian blue antidote was administered. Additional blood work came back, confirming Elena's diagnosis completely and utterly. The atmosphere in the room, once thick with desperate resignation, was now electric with focused, determined hope. 3 hours later, Sterling Vance's vital signs stabilized for the first time in weeks. Amidst the medical flurry, Elena had quietly stepped back, her presence momentarily forgotten. She stood by the wall, once again part of the background. Dr. Finch approached her, his tall, imposing frame seeming somehow smaller now. "Your intervention was—" he began, then paused, visibly struggling with the words. "It was correct, completely and utterly correct." Elena simply nodded, maintaining her professional composure despite the flood of validation washing through her. "How?" he asked, his voice raw with genuine confusion. "How did you see what 20 of the world's most renowned specialists missed?" "Because I'm invisible," Elena replied, the words simple but heavy with meaning. "I observe without being observed. I see the patterns people aren't trying to hide because they don't know anyone is watching, And I never forgot my training, even when life took me a long way from the classroom. Dr. Finch nodded slowly, the truth of her words hitting him with the force of a physical blow. I owe you an apology, Miss Ramirez. We all do. Before he could continue, one of the monitors let out a soft, steady chime. Vance was regaining consciousness. The room hushed as the billionaire's eyes fluttered open for the first time in days. "What?" Vance whispered, his voice a dry, hoarse rasp. "What happened?" Dr. Finch stood at his bedside. A critical moment of choice played across his face, the choice to claim credit or to acknowledge a difficult, humbling truth. He straightened his shoulders. "You were being poisoned, Mr. Vance, with thallium. We missed it, all of us." He turned, his gaze finding Elena where she stood by the wall. He extended a hand in her direction. "This is Elena Ramirez. She's a member of our environmental services staff. She solved the puzzle that 20 specialists couldn't." A complete and total silence filled the multi-million-dollar suite. Every eye in the room, from the most junior resident to the most senior physician, turned to the housekeeper. Sterling Vance's weak gaze found hers. A flicker of understanding, of profound gratitude, passed through his eyes. "Thank you," he whispered, the words barely audible. "Thank you for seeing what they missed." The silence was broken as Dr. Chen began to applaud, a slow, deliberate clap. Others joined in, one by one, until the sound of applause filled the room, a sound of acknowledgement that was impossible to dismiss. Elena stood a little taller, her expertise, her worth, finally visible. The invisible, unbreachable barrier between the medical staff and the support personnel had just cracked irreparably. "Sometimes," she said, her voice quiet but clear, "the most valuable knowledge isn't the kind that's framed on a wall." The momentary triumph was interrupted as 2 FBI agents arrived, their demeanor professional and focused. They spoke briefly with hospital security, then requested statements from key personnel. That now included Elena. "We need to understand exactly how you identified the poisoning, Ms. Ramirez," Agent Martinez explained, treating her with the same deference she afforded the specialists. Elena recounted her story, from noticing the initial symptoms to her makeshift chemical test. With every word, the agent's respect grew. "Your observation may have saved Mr. Blackwell's life," the agent noted, "and it has provided the crucial evidence we need for prosecution. Julian Croft is in custody. The initial motive appears to be a hostile takeover, a gradual poisoning designed to force Vance to step down before a major corporate merger." As the investigation intensified, the medical staff continued administering the antidote. Elena watched as Vance's vital signs strengthened hour by hour on the monitors, tangible, irrefutable proof of her diagnosis. Dr. Chen approached her, offering her a chair. "You should sit. You've been on your feet through this whole ordeal." The simple courtesy, offering a seat to someone who was usually expected to remain standing and unobtrusive, symbolized the profound shift in the hospital's dynamics. As evening approached, Elena prepared to complete her regular duties, a creature of habit. Dr. Finch intercepted her near the supply closet. "Ms. Ramirez," he began awkwardly, "hospital administration has been informed of your contribution. They've authorized paid administrative leave while you assist with the investigation and, well, while we figure things out." The subtext was clear. They couldn't have someone who had just demonstrated such profound expertise returning immediately to cleaning floors. The status quo had been irreparably disrupted. Angela nodded, understanding the complex, face-saving recalibration that was occurring within the hospital hierarchy. "I'll finish my current duties first," she said. Dr. Finch looked startled, then nodded with a newfound, genuine respect. As she completed her shift, she noticed the changed atmosphere. There were nods of acknowledgement from doctors who had previously looked right through her, and warm, congratulatory smiles from the nursing staff. Her cloak of invisibility had been permanently shattered. Over the following days, the hospital administration struggled with what to do about Elena. Her official job title remained Environmental Services Technician, yet she was repeatedly called into high-level meetings to consult on Vance's recovery and the ongoing investigation. At home, she carefully explained the situation to her children. "So, you solved a medical mystery the doctors couldn't?" Leo asked, his eyes wide with a mixture of shock and pride. "I noticed something they overlooked," Elena corrected gently. "Sometimes being in a different position lets you see things that others miss." The story inevitably leaked to the media. Housekeeper solves medical mystery, saves billionaire tech titan. Hospital security managed to keep the reporters at bay, for which Elena was grateful. Public attention had never been her goal. A week after her diagnosis, Elena was formally summoned to the administrative offices. The hospital's chief of medicine, a formidable woman named Dr. Eleanor Matthews, greeted her not as an employee, but as a newfound colleague. "Ms. Ramirez, your actions have placed this institution in an unusual position," Dr. Matthews began, her words carefully chosen. "You demonstrated exceptional diagnostic acumen while working in a non-medical capacity." Elena waited, sensing the administration's dilemma. Her achievement was too significant to be ignored, but acknowledging it fully would mean admitting a systemic failure and disrupting their deeply entrenched hierarchies. "The board has authorized a commendation and a significant bonus," Dr. Matthews continued, "and we would like to discuss potential opportunities here at Crestwood that might better utilize your obvious scientific background." It was a carefully calibrated offer. Recognition without revolution, an opportunity without a full admission of their collective oversight. "I appreciate that," Elena replied evenly. "I've always valued learning, even when circumstances prevented me from pursuing a formal education." Dr. Matthews nodded, visibly relieved by Elena's measured professional response. "Mr. Vance has also expressed a strong interest in speaking with you once he's sufficiently recovered." 1 month later, a message that felt completely surreal arrived. Sterling Vance requested her presence at his corporate headquarters downtown. She arranged for time off, dressed in her best non-uniform clothes, a simple, elegant dress she hadn't worn in years, and entered the gleaming steel and glass tower that housed Vance Innovations. Unlike the hospital, where she had spent years navigating the corridors invisibly, here she was greeted by name and escorted with deference to the executive floor. She found a recovered Sterling Vance. He was thinner and a little paler, but the intensity in his eyes was back. He was very much alive. "Ms. Ramirez," he greeted her, rising from behind a desk the size of a small car. "Please, sit. I've wanted to thank you properly since the moment I regained full consciousness." Elena sat, acutely aware of the dramatic role reversal. The man whose room she had once cleaned was now offering her a chair in his seat of power. "I'm just glad to see you're recovering well, Mr. Vance." "Recovering understates it. I'm alive," he said, his gaze direct and intense. "I'm alive because you saw what others missed. Dr. Finch told me your story. Chemistry prodigy, scholarship student at Crestwood, education interrupted by family tragedy." Elena nodded, surprised at how thoroughly her life story had been investigated. "Intelligence like yours shouldn't be wasted," Vance continued, his tone shifting from gratitude to business. "I've instructed my lawyers to establish a new foundation. Its sole purpose will be to identify and support brilliant minds who have faced financial or personal barriers to completing their education. You, Ms. Ramirez, are its inspiration and its first recipient." He slid a thick folder across the polished expanse of his desk. Inside was the official documentation for a full 4-year scholarship to complete her chemistry degree and pursue her master's at Crestwood University. It included a generous living stipend, childcare provisions, and a guaranteed placement in the Crestwood Toxicology Department upon graduation. "This isn't charity," Vance clarified, noting the stunned look on her face. "This is an investment in exceptional talent. Frankly, the hospital is rather eager to have your expertise on staff officially. It's a much better look for them." Elena's fingers traced the edges of the documents. Dreams she had packed away and buried 2 decades ago were suddenly, impossibly, tangible again. "My children," she began, her voice thick with emotion. "The stipend covers all childcare and living expenses," Vance assured her. "All the practical obstacles have been removed. The only question is, are you ready to reclaim the path that was stolen from you?" That evening, Elena sat with Leo and Sophia, explaining how their lives were about to change. Their eyes widened with pride as she finally recounted the full story she had previously minimized. "You saved a billionaire, Mom?" Leo asked, incredulous. "I used the knowledge I never stopped building," she corrected gently. "And now we have a new chapter to write, all of us." 2 weeks later, Elena Ramirez walked through the main doors of Crestwood University. Not through the service entrance, but through the grand front doors. She held a student ID in her hand for her morning classes, and a hospital intern badge for her afternoon work in the toxicology lab. When she passed Dr. Finch in the hallways, he nodded stiffly, the gesture a clear sign of professional courtesy replacing the old dismissal. Dr. Chen became a friend and a fierce advocate, helping her navigate the complex transition from support staff to specialist in training. "The department already has a couple of cold cases they want your perspective on," he mentioned during lunch one day. "Your observational skills. They're unlike anything they've ever seen." The transition wasn't seamless. There were moments of awkwardness, whispers from staff who still saw her as the janitor. But Elena met these moments with a quiet, unshakable dignity, letting her work and her intelligence speak for themselves. 6 months after the diagnosis that changed everything, Elena was invited to present at a hospital-wide conference on new diagnostic approaches. She stood at the podium, looking out at an audience of doctors, specialists, and residents, many of whom had once walked past her without a second glance. "Observation doesn't require a credential," she began, her voice calm and clear. "It requires attention. Sometimes the most valuable insights come from the most unexpected sources, from people who are trained by society to be invisible, who see what others overlook precisely because they move through the world's spaces differently." Dr. Finch sat in the front row, his expression a complex mixture of respect and the lingering discomfort of a man whose entire world view had been upended. Yet he nodded at her key points, a professional finally able to acknowledge a profound truth. 1 year after saving Sterling Vance's life, Elena attended the inauguration ceremony for the Ramirez Grant for Scientific Excellence, a permanent endowment funded by the Vance Foundation, specifically designed for individuals returning to scientific education after career and life interruptions. The first 5 recipients included a former delivery driver, a retail clerk, and a landscaper, all of whom had demonstrated exceptional scientific aptitude, but had their journeys cut short. 2 years after the diagnosis that changed her life, Elena stood in a graduation gown, her children beaming from the audience. At 44, she was older than most of her fellow graduates, her path to this moment far more unconventional. But as she received her diploma, completing the circle she had started decades earlier, she felt no regret for the winding path. Every experience, the years of invisibility, of dismissal, of cleaning floors, while her mind wrestled with complex chemical equations, had shaped her unique, invaluable perspective. Later, in her new office at the Crestwood University Medical Center, in the very building she had once merely cleaned, now her professional home, she kept a small, framed photo on her desk, It was of her, smiling, in her old gray environmental services uniform. It wasn't a reminder of past dismissal, but an acknowledgement of the unique strength she had forged in that fire. Her phone rang. It was a consulting request from another hospital, a hospital facing its own mysterious, unsolvable poisoning case. Elena picked up the phone, ready to apply both her formal training and her hard-won, irreplaceable perspective. Her voice carried the quiet, unshakable confidence of a person who had proven her worth beyond all doubt. "This is Dr. Ramirez," she answered. "How can I help you?" The title felt right. It felt earned. And as she listened to the details of the case, her mind immediately began to work, to see, to connect the dots that remained invisible to those who had never learned to see from the shadows. And that's the incredible story of how the invisible Elena Ramirez became the essential Dr. Ramirez. If this story of hidden brilliance, of justice, and of seeing the unseen moved you, then you are in the right place. We believe the world is full of people like Elena, whose genius is overlooked every single day. Our channel, Beat Stories, is dedicated to bringing you these powerful narratives, where underdogs rise and the overlooked triumph through sheer talent and unbreakable determination. Every week, we deliver meticulously crafted stories of status flips, moral victories, and the moment when underestimated genius finally gets its due. Hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you never miss our weekly uploads. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you in the comments to hear about a time you, or someone you know, proved the doubters wrong.